Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of your Arlington Dollar. As you know, if you've watched the program before, we trace the money as it comes in and out through Arlington. And one of the biggest budget items each and every year is the school budget, which was recently submitted, and we're going to be talking about that today with who better, our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Kathleen Bodie. Thank you so much, Dr. Bodie, for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
We know that you're dealing with a cold, and we particularly appreciate you taking the time to go through some stuff with us today that's in the budget numbers. So one of the things that is that stands out very starkly is the fact that the budget for high needs students, which the numbers, let me back up and just say the total budget looks like to be around $66 million. I believe, or am I wrong about that?
Is that closer to $60 million.
$60 million, excuse me. And that represents about a 6.6% increase, I think. So one of those items is an ask of $1 million, around $1 million in the FY18 budget for high needs students. That compares to expenses, I believe, of this current fiscal year that are going to be touching close to $900,000. So my imperfect math would say that the ask is for about 11% or so increase. Can you take us through where that comes from? That seems pretty dramatic.
Specifically about our out-of-district placements. Yeah. One of the things that you can see if you look at the history of expenditures for special education, it is very jagged. You have some years where you have high expenses, other years you do not. And this is a year that we had high out-of-district placements. What we do is we respond to the needs of the students that are there that year, whether we can accommodate their needs with our existing programs. If we cannot, then we look with parents as to what might be a good placement for them. This particular year, we've had a lot of out-of-district placements. The increase for this current year has been between $700,000 and $800,000. We expect that number probably will be closer to about $850,000 before the end of the school year. We did not budget last year that amount of money. When we budget out-of-district placements going forward, at that moment in time, we look at what are our out-of-district costs. And that becomes the blueprint for the next year. Now, sometimes those can go down because students age out of a program, they come back into district. There can be a number of reasons. They move out of state, that those numbers can change downward. But in this particular case, since last January, when we basically, the budget was voted in March, but the number for out of district is pretty much set around this time of the year. At that time, we had a baseline. That was what was budgeted for this coming year. And since then, we have seen an increase.
Yeah, so I can see that there's a real conundrum there because, as you say, there's unusual fluctuation in this particular number in the budget year to year that you can't really forecast or control for necessarily, and yet you do have to set a budget that is forward-looking. So how are there mechanisms in place to deal with that inherent fluctuation such that I don't know, there's a fund that you can then, on those years when it comes in lower than you expected, you can put that reserve money in there? How does that work?
We have done that. In fact, when we had one of those low years, we were able to put $325,000 into a stabilization account created by town meeting. And in fact, we'll be going to town meeting this spring looking to have that money transferred into our current operating budget. But that is exactly what we try to do. There's a new mechanism that we will also be taking advantage of going forward, is that you can create a revolving account which operates a little bit differently in that you do not have to have a vote at town meeting to move the money in and out of it. But again,
So
the
it gives you
idea
more
is,
flexibility?
it gives more flexibility. It's still very transparent. But the idea is that when you have years where you are saving some money, that you put the money into that because you can have another year where it's not the case. And if you don't do that, what can happen is that then it affects your operating budget for general education.
Yeah, the money's got to come from
The
somewhere,
money has
right?
to come from somewhere, exactly.
So when we're talking about out-of-district students, can you just clarify, in case there are people in the audience who don't understand, who are we talking about, and are we saying basically that what we're doing is, it's not the expenses that to our school system for accepting students from out-of-district, it's that there are students in Arlington who for one reason or another can't get the services that they need within the Arlington school system and need to go elsewhere? Is that right?
Well, actually, both.
I see. Okay.
We have our students that are in our school district. We have a system of RTI. So if they're not succeeding in a classroom, we put in a lot. We've invested over the years in many interventions. But sometimes our students might need more than that. And we have different programs in the district at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school, for students that cannot be successful in a general ed classroom but need small group instruction. In some situations, it's a combination of being included in general ed classes and getting support in a substantially separate program. But there are also then students that cannot be successful in one of the programs that we have, and that's when the discussions occur about whether we should put them in a more specialized program in either a collaborative setting or in a private school. We belong to a collaborative. It's called the Lab Collaborative. There are 5 school districts that began this back in the 1970s, and we offer we offer classes that are specialized around certain disabilities. And part of our collaborative status is that each of the schools districts host some of those programs, and we host programs here in the Arlington Public Schools. So that's the trajectory. In some instances, the students will stay in an out-of-district placement, and in some instances, students will get, will be able to transition back into the Arlington Public Schools. But we also have students that arrive with an IEP that they may come from an out-of-district placement in their previous school district. So that would be that would be exactly what would happen here. There's a process that they would go through in determining that. But there's legislation around, regulations around how that is determined. We also have students, in fact, we had 2 students this year that arrived from out of state who had been in residential settings. And again, they would be moving into a residential settings, and those costs we would inherit. If a student comes from a town or city in Massachusetts, there is a timeline in which there's cost sharing. There's a deadline in which the sending district pays for the costs, and then when we pick them up.
As you just described that, it is clearer than ever just how hard it is to be able to say from year to year how much money is going to be required in order to address everybody's needs. I assume then that a current expenditure that I think is in the 850 to 900,000 area, and projecting forward a year or in next year's school budget as presented, if the ask is $1 million, I assume that that's at least in part because good fiscal management would say let's try and have enough money to deal with all whatever we could imagine what might arise, and if we don't use it, great, we'll have that stored up for future needs.
That's correct. So the $1 million would be assuming that we would have additional students identified in the spring. It may be more than enough, or it might not be.
Okay. So let's segue from that, and this is a related topic, but let's segue from that to staffing needs or staffing issues that are also addressed in the new budget. And particularly, I wanted to start with the creation of a new director of social and emotional learning. So can you explain what would the role of that person be? And basically, is this a position that has any grant money associated with funding it, or will it just come out of the operating budget, the same as everybody else's salaries?
Well, can I back up a second in terms of where we are with the budget for next year?
Sure.
You've mentioned this specific position. There are some other ones as well. You had said that we'd have a 6.6% increase. That would be in terms of town appropriation, but what we're expecting next year is a decrease in some of our federal grants. So I think that the net increase would be more like 5.5% when you take that into consideration. So when we look at how much money is available, and you take the out-of-district placements we were already talking about, those costs, as well as salary increases, which we can talk about in a minute, there isn't much money left over. So we're asking for very few things. And one of them is a top priority, as you mentioned, is the Director of Social Emotional Learning and Guidance. The fact is we actually did have a Director of Guidance previously. There have been two positions in particular over the years where someone has retired and we have not filled the position. And this is one of them. And this person would be overseeing guidance both in the middle school and the high school. But in addition to that, one of the initiatives we have in the district right now is really looking at the social emotional environments of all of our schools. We've done a lot of work with that, and we're assessing exactly where we are and looking at how we can be more coherent. So right now we're in a study year. So you asked about a grant. We are going to ask the Arlington Educational Foundation to help us with an implementation grant for next year of some of the recommendations that we would have.
Come from this
They're
study.
going to come from this study, exactly. We're going to need someone that's going to oversee that. And so the Director of Social Emotional Learning is going to oversee that process, is going to also be the person that's going to help design professional development, and keep this process moving forward. Right now we have, it's being overseen by a committee of people, but we really do need somebody that has that as their responsibility.
Right. Sounds like, no surprise, she or he will be very busy.
They'll be very busy. This is a strong commitment of the Arlington Public Schools to make sure that all of our students feel safe and welcome, and we have a culture that's very positive and a positive learning environment. And it's intentional, it's consistent, but we feel like we can do more.
And you alluded in your answer just now to the fact that there is like I imagine there always is, but this year as much as any, a discrepancy or a gap between the clear, compelling needs of staff and schools, elementary, middle, high schools, specific needs, and just how much money there is to address them.
Exactly.
One of the things that I know that principals have asked for is the establishment of assistant principal positions.
Yeah.
I know that the ask, I think, was for one in all of the elementary schools. I imagine that is not feasible.
It's not feasible.
But there will be some assistant principals hired in elementary schools?
That's part of the ask. We would have money that would be equivalent to 2.0 full-time equivalent, so two people. Now, whether it's going to be two people, that's the
Right,
issue.
or you need to take those hours and distribute
Exactly.
them.
We look at it as money, and how it can be distributed in different ways. Right now, 4 of our 7 elementary schools have elementary population of 450 or more. Some of them are as high as in the 480s. So these are schools that in other districts, if we were looking at comparables, we would be starting to think about, at least at minimum, a half-time assistant principal, if not a full-time. The demands that have been placed on principals in the last few years have been growing. They are asked to be instructional leaders in their building, but as well as managers of the building. And in some cases, the managing of the building can be rather encompassing. There's also all the student needs, the staffing needs, the evaluation of teachers. It's a very stressful and extensive job. So our principals need some support, and what we really want them to be instructional leaders in their building, which means that they're in the classroom, they're giving feedback on a regular basis to their teachers. But as your number of teachers grow and students grow, this is a very daunting responsibility in terms of time. What I envision would happen next year is that we would use that money to have a half-time assistant principal in a couple buildings, and we would also perhaps have some money to provide some administrative assistance for the other buildings, just to ease up some of the the tasks that maybe could be given to someone else.
So, as you said, there's a tension, or there's a need to address both the management of the building and be an instructional leader, et cetera. Maybe are you thinking in terms of that general administrative support in various schools that would maybe help with the management of that side of the equation?
Right,
I
it'd
guess.
be more in the management side of it, with our principals being freed up a little bit more to do more of the instructional leadership part of the job. Mm-hmm. It's not that they're not doing that right now, but it's in any given day, your day could be derailed with a problem, a facility problem, a student problem, and an observation you may have had planned that day gets put on for a reschedule. Mm-hmm. So yes, it would be perhaps giving some more freedom in that area. One of the things that we know, and I say we as educators broadly, is that probably one of the most effective ways that we help our teachers become better at what they do is the constant feedback.
Feedback, yeah.
And we are dedicated to that, to support our teachers. And so this is it's a positive. It's not looked at as trying to be a punitive at all. It's a very positive kind of role we want to see our principals in. Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to, I'm not meaning to try to box you in any way, but just to get an idea of how it is, because you already mentioned that I think you mentioned that there are at least 4 elementary schools kind of currently at the enrollment levels where you'd like to be able to supply this additional administrative support. Clearly, you've got 2 positions, so I'm wondering how are you thinking that you might decide who would which schools would get an assistant principal versus the more general administrative support you were also talking about?
Well, I think it falls along the lines of the size of the school. Another is whether there is a special education program in the building, because that is also very time-consuming for a principal. And also the desire of the principal and what kind of support they would find most helpful.
So I think one more question on this, on the issue of assistant principals, and that is, you've mentioned that there's funding for 2 positions.
2 FTEs. Mm-hmm.
In this coming year's budget, and I'm wondering, do you anticipate that in ensuing years' budgets you'll be looking to fund more such positions? That's the first part of my question, and the second part is, eventually, though the trend, as we'll discuss a little bit more in a few minutes, the trend in enrollment is clearly continuing to go up for the next number of years. If there is an eventual plateauing of that, and we assume there's going to have to be at some point, will these kinds of positions then be phased out? Or are they basically going to be a permanent part of the budget going forward, do you think?
Maybe I'll start with the last part of the question.
Sure.
It would be in response to what our needs are at the time. Yes, our trajectory is going up. I think that we will see some plateauing in some of our schools over the next few years. At least that's the forecast. We'll see if that's the reality. But the forecast says yes, and we could be looking at those being permanent in some places, but not in others. And yes, some districts where they have seen a decrease in enrollment or they have seen some changes, that they have eliminated those positions. They have. In some districts where they started with a 0.5, they're now at a 1.0. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say what will happen in the years ahead. We'll see how this works. I think we are treating it something as a pilot, and seeing how if it's an effective way to support our principals.
Right. So just to make sure I understand, it sounds like basically you need to, next year, you'll be looking at whatever the situation is next year. And if it looks like such positions would be vitally important, you'll seek to fund them.
Right. I suspect that next year we probably won't expand on it. And the reason why is that the following September, we're going to be opening Gibbs. And we know that there's going to be a need for additional positions to open the school. And I think that's going to be the focus of the school district and the town as to what that number is going to be and how we're going to fund it. But everyone knew when we saw the secondary, the middle school in particular, increasing enrollment, that we were going to be looking at additional positions to address that enrollment growth. And in the decision as to whether to put an addition onto Ottoson versus opening Gibbs, that was something that was considered. While there would be an increase even with an addition, there'll be more of an increase in staffing needs with the Gibbs school. But everybody understood that, and we'll have to be addressing that next year.
Okay, and last question on staffing issues, and that is, it's funny because we're talking about the budget that just came out. Funny timing for the fact that the chief financial officer in the school, Diane Johnson, has just recently left. Mm-hmm. Wondered if you could give us an update on, how things are going in terms of filling that position, and we're curious to know who's doing that work while she's gone.
Okay. I'll make one clarifying point first, though. What came out is my recommended budget. The school committee over the next, this week, and in fact there is a hearing scheduled for the March 2nd. We'll be debating it. They may have different priorities. So the actual vote on what becomes the priorities will not occur till March 16th.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Yeah. Absolutely so. We are in the process.
We are definitely in the process. But to your question about Ms. Johnson, yes, she's just recently left. She had been on a leave earlier part of the year, and there were some obviously there's importance to have a CFO to finish a lot of reports that we had, particularly the end of the year state report. And we hired on a temporary basis someone who is Tony Mertz, who is currently the CFO in Malden, but she was able to give us some hours to help us with that process. And she is going to continue for the rest of this year while we're in a search for a CFO in providing some oversight of the budget process. We have also hired a new accountant. That position had been open for about 8 months, actually closer to a year. And that person is also going to be there on a daily basis looking at, comparing expenses to the budget. So watching the 17 budget and also being available to talk about the 18 budget as we go forward.
I'm struck, just as an aside, I have to mention that on your Arlington Dollar, the conversations we often have here, we do deal with this, with a question of asking about the sharing of resources in surrounding communities as a way of dealing with budget deficits or needs. So the idea that Ms. Mertz would, as the CFO in a nearby town, would also have an ability to help us out in this situation, which is temporary, but there's a real need.
There's a real need for that.
Just that folds into this this theme that we often touch on in our conversations. So, with that aside, let's move to what I think is going to be the last topic to talk about today. You'll be relieved to hear, and that is basically an update on the school situations, specific school situations, all of which, of course, stem from the big white elephant, which is the ever increasing, so far, school enrollment. So if you could start, we'd love to hear about the Thompson and the Gibbs, where things stand with those respective projects at the moment. And then we'll just ask you for an update on where we are with the high school.
That's a long topic. All of those long topics.
Yes.
When you look at where Arlington is right now, we are dealing with so many building projects. And I don't know if there's any town near us that have as many building projects going on as we do currently. Because there's also Stratton.
Right, of course.
Right. So should we start with Thompson?
Anywhere you'd like.
Anywhere we.
I threw a whole lot at you, so you.
All of this is driven, of course, by enrollment growth, and do we have enough classrooms for the students that we are entering our system? And so this is entirely in response to that, which I think, while it obviously puts financial pressures and time and effort, it's also quite a compliment to Arlington, I might say, that people want to be here. And
we have often noted that it is a great problem to have, but it is a problem.
It's a great problem to have, and certainly all of the students that come here enrich us very much. So with respect to Thompson, we are in the process right now of adding 6 classrooms onto Thompson. The timeline has been a little bit off schedule, but we've been reassured that they expect to have no problem having the wing available in September this year.
Wow, for the next academic year?
This next academic year.
Great.
And we fortunately have the 2 modular classrooms. Actually, it's a little modular building with 3 small classrooms in them. They're not regular sized classrooms that we have rented through next year, which will be very helpful as a backup.
So that's been there in operation throughout.
Yes. The 5th grade is
2016,
currently.
17.
I'm sorry. The 5th grade is currently are located in the modular classrooms.
Got it.
Yes. But our expectation is that we will open, and one of the 6 classrooms will be a larger room, which will provide some additional core space for maybe an extra for gym classes. What is happening in all of our elementary schools is that we often have to double book phys ed classes, and depending on the size of the gym at a particular school, that can be challenging. So having a little extra space will be helpful in that regard. That's Thompson. The Stratton School is moving along quite well, and we fully expect to have no problem opening in September. And people who have had some sneak previews are very pleased with what they're seeing.
Yeah, I have to say everything we hear about the story at Stratton at the moment just seems very positive, and people are really optimistic. Mm-hmm. It's always nice to
It's
have
wonderful.
some of
It's
that.
wonderful, and in fact, what we probably should do is have a walking tour of the new building when it's ready for that.
Well, we would love to join you for that. So
It will
let
be
us
great.
know.
We'll have the building principal give a walking tour, and maybe one of the architects as well to talk about.
That would be great.
Yeah, that would be super. With respect to Gibbs, we are moving along with that project as well. Our tenants will have their lease until the end of June, and we expect to begin July 1 in staging for all of the renovations. We have been working this fall in looking at floor plans and to be able to have all of the programming that we currently have for sixth graders available to them in the new building. We have an advisory committee that's made, it's actually a fairly large advisory committee, made up of teachers and parents that will be meeting with our architects to look at design. The most of the work this fall has been really just looking at floor plans, determining size of rooms, placement of rooms, adjacency. But now we're a little bit more at the fun level in which we can say, all right, what are the color schemes? What are the finishes we want? What are some of the structures we might want to have outside? So that advisory committee will be meeting, in fact, this week with our architects.
And just to remind everybody, what we're talking about is a targeted opening date of
Yes.
September 2018.
2018.
Right.
And the plan is that right now that the sixth grade teachers that are at the middle school will move over to Gibbs. And we will also have our teachers that, special education teachers, art, music, world language, coding, all of those programs will be moving as well. I think the challenge for us, and we'll be spending quite a bit of time planning this, is how to minimize as much as possible teachers that have to travel between the two buildings.
Yeah, that sounds like a challenge, but but doable.
Yes.
We'll hope.
Yes, and we're going to be having, and again, thanks to the Arlington Education Foundation, we're going to have a planning grant that will provide stipends for work. A lot of the work will happen this summer, though some of it has already begun in thinking about the programming, the culture of the building.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So that leaves just the tiny little issue of the high school.
Tiny little, but there's also Hardy.
Excuse me, before we get to the high school.
Hardy, the School Enrollment Task Force has recommended that we put an addition on Hardy as well. And that will be brought to town meeting, and with the idea that if we begin the process, we would be opening an addition at Hardy in September 18. So September 18 is going to be a big year.
Right, and you're not kidding. I'm obviously losing track myself as the question asker. You're not kidding that we've got to be the busiest town in terms of school construction in the area.
We are, and much gratitude to the voters in Arlington that they voted the money last June to begin these projects, because we are doing these projects without the benefit of support from MSBA. But the guidelines for MSBA are very clear. You have your focus project, and there's no doubt that the focus project is Arlington High School.
Right, and just an update from where we were last time we checked in, which was last summer after the debt exclusion vote that included moving forward with a feasibility study for the high school. Where are we now?
We have moved through what they call the first phase, Module 1, which is an eligibility period. And during that time, you create your committee. You provide some background on your capital maintenance costs and structures, and as well as educational programming. But the most important part of the first part, besides those, is determining what the design number is going to be for the high school. And I will say that we work very collaboratively with MSBA, looking at their analyses, our analyses as to what should be the design number for the school. MSBA has a process that they go through, and rightly so. They're responsible for all this money be distributed throughout the state, and they have to have a very consistent process by how that money is distributed. But as I said, we worked very well with them, and we came to a number that we both agreed was the right number and will work for the high school, and that number is 1,755. Now, there's a lot of confusion sometimes about what that number means. So if I could just talk
Please.
a little bit about that. What that number is the number of homerooms that you would have in the high school. So you take the number 1755 and have the assumption at the secondary level to be 23 students. You divide the 1755 by 23 students and then multiply it by 0.85, 85%, because I want to make sure that there is high utilization of each room. So that determines the number of homerooms. That does not determine your educational spaces. And that's very important. So this next phase that we will be entering, the feasibility stage, that is the stage where we look at our educational programming as to what would be the best layout of all of the spaces and what kind of educational spaces do we need to match our programming. So that's the role of the 1755. It is on the homeroom number, and it is not on the other educational spaces.
Right. So again, just to make sure I'm clear, when you say homerooms, you're not only talking about, teachers have their homerooms in those rooms, but those are also where they're teaching their classes.
Yes.
So most of the core classes are going to be taught in the existing homerooms as
Yes.
configured in that way. And then the extra educational spaces have to do with everything else that happens outside of the core.
So for example, music rooms would not be considered homerooms, or maker spaces would not be homerooms, or computer labs, if we had computer labs. So there are types of educational spaces that are not expected to be used as homerooms.
And I would think that there's any number of challenges to this current phase that you're in, where you're trying to figure out what the appropriate educational spaces are. Among those challenges includes the fact that this high school has been around for a long time. The rebuild is going to be around for a long time. So as difficult as it is to forecast school enrollment numbers and any number of other things, you really need to try and figure out what are the ways that kids are going to be learning, or that can enhance kids' learning moving forward in ways that are hard to imagine, I assume.
This is a very important phase, not that they all aren't in the process. Where we are right now is that our next task is to find an owner's project manager. And when the building committee meets, we will be appointing a subcommittee for that process. And the owner project manager is the person that is hired by the town to oversee the project and keeping the interests of the town foremost.
Paramount. Mm-hmm.
Yes. That process the process will take several months. The earliest we probably would have an owner's project manager would be June 5th, because you bring your selection to an oversight panel at MSBA, and they give approval for that selection. Once that person is selected, and it's usually a firm as well, once that person is selected, then they will help the town in the next phase, which is hiring a designer. That process will probably take place through the summer into the early fall. It's at that point, when we have the designer, that we then really start pulling, we engage more formally, not that it's not happening right now, but more formally, teachers, administrators, the public, in talking about the educational vision of the school, the educational program of the school, and you look at the different options that you would have given your site, as to what possibly you could have in the way of the preferred option for where the high school will be, what it will look like. So that is all that will go on. And what you eventually do through the feasibility process is you bring to MSBA your preferred option that is that will accommodate the educational plan, meet your site restrictions, and be the most cost effective. And the MSBA board must approve that, and it's only at that point that you then move into a schematic stage where the more detailed drawings of the project are developed.
And eventually you get to pick colors of classrooms and things
That's
like
way down the road on
That's
this
what I
one,
mean,
way down the
right.
road, because then after that, you have to, the schematics then determine what the, we go into a discussion about the cost of the building. And at that stage, we have to provide the money, and that will be an override for the project. So we have quite a few stages to go through before we actually come to the point of an override for the project.
And just a quick follow-up on the idea of feasibility. I don't know if the decision makers at this point have a time frame in which they imagine that the building's that they imagine for the building's viability. But I'm just going to throw a number out. Let's just assume it's 50 years. What is reasonable? What is feasible to actually be able to try and plan for? 50 years doesn't seem like a reasonable amount of time. Is there a reasonable amount of time? Is it 20 years? Is it 25? And then after that, you're just basically trying to adjust to existing conditions.
Well, I think if MSBA was here in our discussion, they would want to see us build a building that would last 50 years. And to their credit, the processes they put in place for the quality of the programming and the flexibility of the programming you eventually choose is meant to ensure that. We certainly have throughout the whole state, and we have it's certainly true here in Arlington, buildings that were built in the 70s, 80s, were not done at the quality level they should be. That's why we're having these building programs. So a lot of thought will go into the quality of the infrastructure of the building and trying to make the infrastructure as high quality as possible with an eye toward being green, that we have as much of our materials be low maintenance and cost efficient. So there'll be that whole phase of the project as we look at the design and what we have to put into the building. But the other part of it is educational programming. You need to be able to build a building that is going to be as flexible as possible for the future. And that is hard. And there were certainly buildings done, 30 years ago that had open space, and they've had to change that. So it's not to say that things won't change in the future, but what you want to do is think as flexibly as possible in how you design the building.
Right. Yeah, and I was thinking, yes, it seems to me more possible to come up with a building that will last, will maintain its integrity, and be, run in the most environmentally efficient way possible. Mm-hmm. The physical plant I can imagine doing over the course of 50 years. Hard, but possible. That educational planning piece seems like magic in a sense. It's so hard to forecast.
And because education is changing, and it will change. I think that we've gone through decades where high schools have looked very much the same. If you came into a high school today, or maybe not so much today, but a few years ago, it would not appear to be that much different than what you experienced in high school. But that is changing. And the catalyst for that change is technology. And we're beginning to see some of those effects already. And one of the things that will happen with the use of technology is there'll be a lot more small group work. So how do you create that so that there's that possibility? And there'll perhaps be more online learning. We already are seeing that at the high school. Down the road, will there be more internships and off-school learning that ties into our programming here? That's already happening. So how do you scale it? And what will it look like when it's scaled?
Yeah, really, you're just touching on the tip of the iceberg there in terms of the kinds of things that you got to wrestle with. And, you know, needless to say, I'm sure we're in good hands with that, but it does seem like a daunting prospect to try and figure those things out and then implement them in a physical way in the school.
Right. They can envision, but then what does it look like? And how do you create that flexible space? So when we get to that point, we will have someone who will help facilitate these discussions. In fact, we did that with Gibbs. Back in the fall, we had facilitated discussions both with the faculty and with parents to talk about what are your priorities, and how, then the next stage is, well, how do we put those priorities into physical space? And there are constraints. With Gibbs, for example, the building is the building. I mean, there's a certain limitation of what you can do. When we come to the high school, will we have constraints as well? Will some parts of the building remain in a renovation state, and will we be doing an addition? I suspect that right now, if I was to project, I would say we probably have a combination of the two. So you have different kinds of constraints with new construction. Where will it be? And we have different constructions when you're doing a renovation.
Right, and what you're going to do to operate the, you know, you're going to have an operating school as you're making the renovations. So
that is going to be one of the challenges we have. In other districts where they have more land, they've been able to build the new school, the entirely new school on, say, their field.
Right, I know that that's what they're doing at Minuteman, I believe, is that they're building it on the field, and then the existing school property will become the field. And that seems simple enough, but not really possible here in Arlington, I don't think.
It's not possible. At Woburn, they did the same thing. It's not possible here because the field where it exists right now was a toxic site that we partnered with the companies and EPA to create a barrier to the toxicity. So that really probably is not possible, but that is something that would be looked at clearly in the feasibility study. Perhaps there are technologies today that would allow for that. I suspect not, but we won't know until we actually go through that process with the architect.
Okay, well, I have to say this has been an extensive conversation. I know that you arrived not feeling all that well. I want to express our particular appreciation for your thoughtfulness, the comprehensiveness of your responses, and also the clarity. Really appreciate that.
You're most welcome.
And I wanted to give you an opportunity, should there be anything, I can't think of it, but is there anything that you would like people to know that we have not covered in today's conversation?
Well, we've covered quite a bit, but you did touch on the CFO search. We do have other searches going on. We currently are looking for a middle school principal, and we have a large committee of, I believe it keeps expanding, but it's a fairly large committee.
All the committees you mentioned seem to be pretty large and
There's
expanding.
a strong interest in this community and participation, and I think that's one of its strengths. So we have a large high school building committee, we've Gibbs Advisory Committee, now a search committee, so that's all positive. And so we do march forward and with all of these openings. I guess the last thing I would say is that, sitting where I am, I want to express my appreciation to people in Arlington, because the support that we have had to our school system over the last few years has just been extraordinary. And it really, it's most appreciated by me, certainly I know by all of our staff, and has made an important difference in how we can do the work we're doing.
Well, certainly people in Arlington care about these things very deeply, and they pay a lot of attention. We know that at ACMi and here on your Arlington Dollar. And fortunately, we also have government in town in all its aspects that is as interested in transparency as we are. And so we appreciate that very much. And this conversation, just the latest example of that.
And I do want to encourage people to look at our website. There's just volumes of information there. We've tried this year to make it more user-friendly, but all of these documents that we generate for these building projects and for the budget are all online.
Okay, well, thanks again
You're
for
welcome.
taking the time to be with us today. We hope that you have enjoyed the conversation and maybe even more importantly, gotten something of substance from it. Certainly I have, as I always do here on Your Arlington Dollar. Thanks for joining us. With appreciation to Superintendent Bodie and to you for joining us. I'm James Milan, and we'll see you soon.